That makes sense. I mean, life is, all pain and suffering anyway.
I know.
So.
Should we get to it? Okay. I'm very excited to hear what you guys think about this.
Yeah.
Because, so we're doing Schopenhauer. We got Brother X here again. And, we're doing some of his essays and aphorisms. And basically, Schopenhauer is known for his pessimistic philosophy. And this was, nothing if not pessimistic.
Right.
And so we very pessimistic.
I guess we didn't do any aphorisms. We only did essays.
Yeah, it's true. But it was we're doing 2 today, on the suffering of the world and then on the indestructibility of being.
Yeah.
And I didn't know we were doing that second one.
Oh, yeah. We don't have to do that second one.
Okay.
I had thrown it out there as a possible one.
Okay. I have a lot more
things.
Arguments against the second one than the first one.
Well,
that's fine.
Mark will be
I'll hear him.
Brother X. Brother X will be the expert for the first one, and Antush will be the expert.
Yeah, that's
for the
right.
second
I'm an
one.
expert.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's why we bring you in. We're bringing in an expert because we are just dummies. I don't know.
It's
well,
true.
here's what I'd like to bring to the table because I thought this was funny. So I found a PDF copy online that I was reading, and when I opened it, it opened in in Adobe, and I got this little note there saying, "Do you want to try the AI generative summary?" So I clicked OK. And so the summary, it gave me a 1-sentence summary.
Wow.
The document is an essay by Arthur Schopenhauer titled On the Sufferings of the World, discussing the nature of suffering and the futility of life. So,
Good job, AI.
That's what AI has to offer to the conversation.
Yeah, Adobe's got a long way to go with their AI.
Yeah.
Actually, Adobe has really good AI noise removal.
That's true, actually.
For their audio?
Yeah.
Is that what you used? No, you used a different plugin.
I don't use AI for noise removal at all. Thank you very much.
I thought you did for
No, not AI. It's a program called Isotope, but it's not an AI program.
Oh, I thought it was.
No. So what you can do is you can take a snapshot of noise without speaking, and then
it zeroes it out, basically.
Exactly. Yes.
I could have done that.
Sure.
It just would have taken me a long time.
Right.
But I could have done it.
Yeah.
ChatGPT is ridiculous. I bet if we had just copied it and put it into that, it would have been able to do
what's more ridiculous than ChatGPT?
Antushka GPT?
No, Schopenhauer's views on life.
Oh.
Yes.
All right.
So trying to bring us back. Hey, before we start, where can people email you if they're upset about our takes?
plausibledeniabilityamx@gmail.com.
There you go.
They can also, in theory, contact us on Twitter.
That's true. If you can find us.
Right. Like, our special guest next week contacted us on Twitter.
Oh yeah, we won't talk about that, but we are. I don't know. I guess we can, but we don't want to jinx it in case we don't end up doing it. But we'll potentially have a special episode next Monday.
Wow. Yeah. Wait, you mean this isn't the special episode?
This is a special episode.
Another special episode. Don't worry.
Yeah.
This is where we tell everybody that Brother X is running for Senate in Illinois. For the Libertarian ticket.
Yeah, there you go.
We may or may not be interviewing somebody else about that. Right. But you'll never know until next week, potentially.
Right.
Yeah. Who knows?
Okay, so the suffering of the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so should we start with the basic summary of this lovely suffering world?
Yeah, sure. Brother X.
Well, I guess Brother X already gave a pretty good summary.
That's true. It was pretty good.
No, I mean, all right. So from a summation standpoint, I would say one thing that was kind of interesting, but I think it makes
standpoint.
I don't know if whatever. I'm making this up as I go. One thing that did kind of stick out that and maybe it's the translation that I had, but he starts out kind of talking about, suffering being the positive, which I think is a little misleading. But I guess what I understood is that basically, like, if life is a game of golf, suffering is par, right? And you're trying to shoot under par. So, like, happiness, pleasure, that's the negative that brings your score down from par, which is just, suffering. That's your baseline, right?
Yes, I think that's it. And I think this sort of gets at the centrality of the pessimistic philosophy, which is basically it's flip. Most people look at goodness and I guess and feeling good and all that stuff as the positivity, right? Mm-hmm. But he's flipping it on its head, and he's saying that the only natural thing and sort of the most, and not only that, but the most common, like the more abundant thing in life, that was an important point, is suffering. Suffering actually outweighs, I guess, goodness, or what would he say?
I don't know. Pleasure.
Well-being, yeah.
Well-being.
It's the and then, so on this fact is founded that I have often before drawn attention to the negativity of well-being and happiness in antithesis to the positivity of pain.
Right.
And misfortune in general is the rule.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
So,
well, and that I guess the other thing too is that, like, pain and suffering. I guess he thinks like we feel those more strongly, right? Mm-hmm. And that like pleasure and happiness are never, I guess, as good as we would want, right? Because it's really just, it's not that it's actually a positive feeling, but it's just the absence of the negative one. So it's never actually a net positive, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah, and one of the reasons I wanted to read this is because, so we just read The Antichrist by Nietzsche, and we're on a real uplifting kick right now.
Yeah, this is the anti-happiness.
It's true. And Nietzsche was saying an interesting thing about boredom and, like, God and the priest, and how, is basically like God kept creating things. Well, God was bored, so God created the world and man. And then man was bored, so God created animals, but he was still bored, so he created women. So it's like this idea that boredom is this motivating force for all these things. And Schopenhauer talks about boredom a lot. And so one of the reasons Schopenhauer was a big influence on Nietzsche, right? He was about a generation before Nietzsche. Nietzsche wrote about Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer was kind of like, I mean, for as depressing as he writes, I think it's a little bit reflective of his life. Like, I don't think he got a lot of acknowledgement for his work when he was alive. He taught at a university, but I don't think he was like super popular while he was alive. Certainly, like Hegel and all these people were more popular. But you could see the Hegelian dialectic all through what he's writing as well, and the influence of Hegel, or at least the idea that everybody was thinking in dialectic back then, it seems.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, he never married, so he lived alone. I think he died pretty late in his life, though. He wrote this, I think, when he was 60, and I think he died in his 70s. I think he wrote it in 1850, and he died in 1860, and he was born in like 1788 or something. So he was a child of the Napoleonic War too. And we talked about this other thing where, like, he also had this weird interaction with an old woman when he was like in his 30s or something, where I guess he pushed her down the stairs or something. I don't know why. And he had to pay her restitution for the rest of her life. So I also wonder what that did to his his opinion.
He's just like, oh, this sucks so much. Everyone's life must suck this much.
Basically. I mean, yeah. Or I also wonder about chronic pain. I wonder about this, about affecting somebody's outlook of the effect of being in chronic pain for whatever reason, which honestly, like, a lot of people were and still are, but certainly were back in the day before medicine.
It's
modern
interesting that you
medicine,
mentioned he wasn't married, and I wonder what kind of relationships he had.
Well,
and obviously, like, you know, sex isn't all there is to a marriage, but there is that one line. He's talking about, like, I may mention that as regards to the sexual relation, a man is committed to a peculiar arrangement which drives him obstinately to choose one person. This feeling grows now and then into more or less passionate love, which is the source of little pleasure and much suffering.
Yes.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
so yeah, I don't know what his romantic relationships were like, but probably not very positive.
Probably not very positive. And yeah, I mean, this was something that Nietzsche talked about in his, so he wrote Untimely Meditations, which we read, I think, at least some of them. I think there might be actually more that we didn't read, but we at least read two of them, right? And one of them was like on Schopenhauer, basically, as a teacher, Schopenhauer as teacher or something.
Yeah.
And a big thing that Nietzsche's putting in that is exactly saying, is sort of lauding Schopenhauer for being a true philosopher, because he basically shuck everybody else's opinions. He followed his own path to the truest amount that he could, and he also leaned into loneliness and isolation. So my understanding from Nietzsche, and then from, you know, whatever Wikipedia and stuff, is that he was a very isolated person. And I mean, I imagine he had romantic relationships, but I don't know how many, and it doesn't seem...
Well, Nietzsche didn't really, so maybe Schopenhauer didn't either.
Yeah, well, and exactly, yeah. Although Nietzsche says in Ecce Homo that he always got along well with women, and women always liked him. But I don't know if that's as a friend or if it's...
Yeah, as a friend. No, so I learned about this. So he had this weird three-way relationship with Wagner and his wife.
Oh,
really?
Yes.
Yeah. But never anything came of it. And, like, they would invite him for Christmas, and he'd be this third wheel, like, really weird. And then later he had this other lady in his life who was a friend who he kept trying to pursue, and she kept turning him down. And he would do things like he did a photo shoot with her where she was like whipping him and he was pulling a cart. And it's an actual photo, like from the 1880s. So this is a hard thing to do. They did a photo shoot of her whipping him. And he still never got with her. And he'd go on dates in his 30s, and his younger sister would chaperone, and then, you know, women wouldn't like it.
Yeah.
No, he was... Apparently the only women he ever had sex with were prostitutes.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me. Anyway, we talked about that. He was in another like three-way relationship with that woman you're talking about, and that guy. They
Lou
traveled.
Salome or whatever. Yeah.
They traveled together.
and before he died, he kept writing love letters to Wagner's wife, signing them Dionysus and stuff like that.
That's funny. So yeah.
Also, he didn't like Schopenhauer at the end.
Oh, he didn't?
Yeah, he hated Schopenhauer. By the end, he gave up on Hegel, Kant, Schopenhauer, the whole thing. He thought they were all wrong.
Well, he had hated on Kant for a while. And I mean, that makes sense because Schopenhauer, I think, is in line with Kant.
Right.
So that's the other big philosopher who's looming over the period is Kant. But yeah, okay. So I just wanted to interject with some of that background. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, Brother X, I think as you can see, I think he was pretty isolated. And I think, I mean, it's always a good question of how much does that actually affect, you know, your opinion about things. I think it seems probably a lot in this case. But also, I don't know, because, so this is the thing. One of the reasons I wanted to read this, too.
What is the thing? Yes.
What is the thing?
Is this speaks to my heart a lot.
I know it does.
Of course it does.
As we were reading, I was just like, that bastard.
Yep. I was like,
especially the second reading that we didn't get to.
Especially the second reading.
I know.
Yes.
As I was reading it, I was just like,
I can't wait to hear an AI
just like
summary of
devilishly laughing in his apartment right now.
Yes. No, I mean, if you want to know, like, my philosophy, I feel like this is very close to it, to be perfectly honest. maybe not quite as pessimistic, but yeah, certainly the second one. But yeah, I mean, this idea though that I guess I haven't ever thought about, like, is there more well-being versus suffering? Mm-hmm. Like the levels of them, as he discusses in this, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of suffering, and it seems like that is the norm. Yeah, and I've even kicked around the idea that it's not my own idea. I'm sure other people, but like, yeah, it's like if you wanted to imagine hell, it's like, well, what about right now? It's like you it's like there's lots of ways that you can imagine that we are living in a type of hell if
right.
you just look at how brutal nature is, and you look at most people's lives, quite frankly. But I also am, at least I would say lucid and not so callous. Maybe I will be when I'm Schopenhauer's age. That there's a lot of good too, and I would say on the whole, I personally spend more time feeling good than I do feeling bad, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like if I had to weigh how I'm feeling, like constantly, if I had to put a number to that, it would be more positive towards well-being, I should say, than towards not. But I don't know.
Yeah, I'm curious what you thought of sort of his distinction in the middle, or it's kind of throughout it, but I think he goes more into it in the middle, between like what he calls man versus the brute.
Yes.
And just sort of, I guess like kind of the implications of our perceptions of, pain, suffering, happiness, satisfaction, all that, with regards to our level of consciousness.
I think it's translated as animal in my translation.
Oh, okay. Mine is brute.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, that's a good question. It follows pretty similar to how I think about things. And sorry, I didn't finish the thought with boredom, but yeah, I mean, boredom is important for him in that. So he excels the animal in his capacity for enjoying intellectual pleasures, he being, humans, to be sure, and these are available to him in many degrees, from the simplest jesting and conversation up to the highest achievements of the mind. But as a counterweight to this, on the side of suffering stands boredom, which is unknown to the animals, at least in the state of nature, and is only very slightly perceptible in the very cleverest domesticated ones, while to man it has become a veritable scourge. Want and boredom are indeed the twin poles of human life. So I thought that was interesting, and also the idea that boredom, where is that quote? With the animal, present suffering, even if repeated countless times, remains what it was the first time. It cannot sum itself up. Well, that's an interesting point, but that's not the quote that I wanted. It's somewhere basically saying how boredom is kind of an shows like the mind. Or it's like it's reflective of the mind. Like boredom wouldn't exist without consciousness or something.
Mm-hmm. Right. Animals don't get bored. He talks about that.
Oh, yeah. They're just kind of content in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So the point on boredom that stuck out to me was when he was talking about that, like, people basically spend all of their lives, running from pain and suffering and, seeking happiness and pleasure. And that if we had everything we wanted, people would die of boredom or hang themselves or inflict pain on each other that nature wasn't inflicting on us.
Right.
Yeah. And so,
like we'd have to create something for ourselves to run from. We'd have to create
in
the
the
pain
utopia,
and
we die of boredom. Yeah.
We either die of boredom or we create the pain and suffering for each other to run from.
Yep.
Which I think we do pretty well.
I was just about to say, I mean, do you disagree with that, I guess is my question.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree that we inflict a lot of pain and suffering on each other. I disagree that that's a result of us being in a utopia, because
right, because we're But it could be this idea that. So this is something that Antushka and I talked about before. How like I view consciousness and civilizations trying to build up consciousness. So as civilization develops, it selects for more conscious beings, and so that thus, if consciousness and boredom are associated, then you'll get more boredom in civilization because you'll have more beings that have the capacity to be bored. If you have more beings that have the capacity to be conscious.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess my disagreement is that I don't think we have to get to a state of utopia to get to a point where we're inflicting pain and suffering on each other.
Well, it's just a question of at what point are we a utopia, and at what point is it just like it's going to happen as you're on that track? Like,
well, I guess the way he defines it, if the world were a paradise of luxury and ease, a land flowing with milk and honey, where every jack obtained his jill at once and without any difficulty. I don't know. So have we reached that?
No. Kind of. I don't know. It's like life is easier than when Schopenhauer was living from a standpoint of like hot showers, right?
But haven't we been inflicting pain and suffering on each other for thousands of years?
Yes. But my point is, are we not, despite the fact that we have all of these, we have mitigated this more basic suffering, at least in the first world, we still have, now we have a anxiety crisis, right? Now we have people who can't, that maybe didn't have anxiety 150 years ago, or may not have. Now we have many more people who are just basically lost in themselves and distraught.
I think we're talking about two different things, though. I think you're talking about you're painting your pessimistic view of the world. I'm just stating that we didn't have to reach a utopia to inflict pain and suffering on each other.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I think you're correct that the pain and suffering exists all the way through. Yeah. I think that the radicalness or the revolutionariness of the statement is that as the utopia arrives or we get closer to it, the pain and suffering doesn't decrease, and all of the things that we would think would make it decrease, we actually counter by just creating more pain and suffering to maintain an equal level of pain and suffering. And so the idea is that even though we have hot showers, we have figured out all sorts of new ways of inflicting pain and suffering on ourselves and other people.
Right, which I would agree with. And
so the utopia isn't required for the pain and suffering. It's that utopia doesn't mitigate it at all.
Yes. Well, and my point was that we're on the path to utopia. That's all I was trying to say. Like, we are trying to make a utopia, and in so doing, to your point, we still have all this pain and suffering, which I guess I'm agreeing with.
Yes.
I was just, I was just trying to...
I agree as well, yeah.
Yeah, so I was just trying to say what Antushka said, much more eloquently.
You were trying to say it more eloquently than Antushka did?
I tried to, but I didn't.
Okay.
Oh, yes, I was trying to say it more eloquently.
And in doing so, you've inflicted pain and suffering on our understanding of this text.
I like this.
And in so doing, I didn't do it eloquently again in trying to describe how eloquently he said it. Okay. So.
All right.
Okay.
Moving on.
No, we don't have to move on. It's just.
No, let's get hung up on this, on the eloquent bit.
No, I think that was a good point about boredom, though. That that we will still, despite a utopia, will still inflict pain. Yes, and I'm thinking that this quote about boredom and sort of existence actually might be in another essay. So I'll stop looking for it because I don't think it's on here. But the point was that boredom is for him. Oh, here it is. Yeah, it is in the next. Yes, it's in the next essay, which we didn't read, on the vanity of existence. But the quick quote is basically, or the quick summary is, boredom is equal to the sensation of emptiness of existence. So boredom is when you're aware of the emptiness of existence, which of course only going to come from a conscious being, which makes sense why you wouldn't have animals. And so getting back to this essay, he describes the animal as the present incarnate, which is something that I definitely agree with, and we've talked about previously, and I think Nietzsche agrees with how he at least writes about history in Untimely Meditations,
Right.
And he even has that description of the cow. The guy's talking to the cow. And he's like, you know.
So
yeah.
I've got a question.
Sure.
At one point, there's this line. Following upon this, there's one respect in which brutes show real wisdom when compared with us. I mean, their quiet, placid enjoyment of the present moment. Do we understand non-conscious beings as experiencing enjoyment in the same way that we do? That kind of struck me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think about Gracie, the dog, sitting over here, and I don't know that I feel strongly that she either does or doesn't enjoy existence. She's just existing, right?
Yeah, I think it's what people call joy.
Joy is just existence?
Is like, yeah, it's like non-reflective happiness.
Non-reflective happiness. Okay, interesting. I haven't thought about that.
That was something that I actually
haven't
got
reflected on that.
I got into a discussion about this with some friends like 3 years ago and hadn't thought of joy like that, but they described it, I think, from more of a Christian, because one of them has a pretty Christian background. I feel like that's where he was coming with it. And I think I agree with that idea. But yeah, I mean, but also, yeah, to answer your question, yeah, it's just a I don't know. I mean, there probably is no experience, though, the point is. So, yes, I mean, to your point, without consciousness, you don't have experience. So you don't have...
do you have enjoyment?
So you wouldn't have experiencing anything, because enjoyment's an experience, is how I would think about it.
Because the tree fell in the forest and no one was there to hear it.
Right. It's a moot question.
Okay.
And he talks about that more in the next essay, actually, I would say. Wouldn't you agree, Antushka?
Yes.
That's
yes.
sort of addressed.
Sort of, in kind of a weird way, but yes.
Mm-hmm.
So my biggest question about this whole thing is it felt to me like reading theology. It felt like he's just proposing an idea of meaning. It's like listening to Jordan Peterson or something and saying meaning comes from the struggle of overcoming things in life. It's something that isn't. It's not really provable. It's really just an assertion. I know he tries to prove it logically, but so where he starts is if the immediate and direct purpose of our life is not suffering, then our existence is the most ill-adapted to its purpose in the world. And so he's proposing a purpose to life being suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And then he makes arguments about, cases of suffering, why suffering is so important to us, how suffering is important to us versus animals versus completely non-conscious things.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, you could make a case for any experience being the purpose of our life if you wanted to. That was like Jordan Peterson's thing. Struggle is the purpose of our life, or maybe boredom is the purpose, or happiness, or joy, or whatever. And it isn't that people don't make those arguments. And so, me, the entire thing is pretty uncompelling because it sounds like a depressed person, like we talked about. A really depressed person who hates his life asserting that is the way of life. And it's like I notice this when I talk to people who are really depressed, who have become cynical. They think that the hard truth is that life sucks and we all just need to accept this. And it's like that isn't the hard truth. That is your truth.
Is this what you've gotten out of your conversations with Mr. X?
No, actually. No. This is not me arguing with anything that Mr. X has said. This is me feeling like Schopenhauer has not made his case very well.
No, I think that's accurate, and it's because the proof is based on the way it resonates with a number of people's personal experience, right?
Right.
But just like you're saying, like, that's not provable. There's enough people that will say, oh, yes, I feel that way, I agree with this, that it then sounds compelling and can gain traction. And that's true for any number of different, like you said, theologies or philosophies or just arguments about the, you know, what life is all about.
Yeah. And I think his data set is more or less correct. I think when he's saying that, generally speaking, this feels true to me, that pain is worse than pleasure. And I will do more to avoid pain than to seek pleasure. Like, I would rather not have my arm cut off than eat candy. Right? Like, by a lot.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, right. I really don't want my arm cut off. But
Scaredy cat.
I was waiting for it.
I hope next episode you don't have an arm and you're like, see? Not so bad. It's the purpose of life, dude.
Yeah. That'd be great.
No. So I agree with those things. Like, the data that he's laying out is correct. To me, that it's the next step of, and therefore that is the meaning. To me, meaning is already kind of a strange thing to be arguing for in an objective sense. I mean,
Yeah,
I know that he blends objective and subjective, and we should get into that a little bit.
I was just about to say, maybe this is a good opportunity to switch to the next one. Because, I mean, on that, unless, Brother X, do you have any further things to say about this before we jump to the next? Because that's
nothing terribly important unless you guys wanted to talk about Christianity. Because he like ties in Christianity at the end. And I think I kind of disagreed with sort of his perspective on it.
Yeah.
Which may or may not be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, let's talk about that. You're talking about the fall?
This is the end, or this is like midway through 9, right?
Yeah.
Because he gives the Buddhist view of existence and nirvana, and then he talks about Jehovah.
Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, and he brings in that the only truth he sees is that there was this fall, and he talks about that life is the penal colony, and we're just here like paying for our past sins, right?
So I have
the
that
sin
quote.
of existence itself, right?
Do you want me to read that? I think it's a good
Sure,
quote.
yeah.
So the story of the fall is consequently the only thing which reconciles me to the Old Testament. I even regard it as the sole metaphysical truth contained in that book, even though it does appear clothed in allegory, for our existence resembles nothing so much as the consequence of a misdeed, punishment for a forbidden desire. And then, it's better to view this world as a sort of atonement or a penal colony. And, that's very true. I mean, you look at that in like Ecclesiastes. I mean, you read Ecclesiastes, it's all about life is vanity, all is vanity, and nothing new. And it's very much like, it feels kind of like life is suffering, and it's all about toil, right? So, I mean, and again, even looking at our family's philosophies, I mean, we have certain things that our parents would say in jest, but it's just like, yeah.
You mean like sit down and shut up?
No, like you work.
It's a good philosophy.
99% of life isn't fair, and then stuff like that.
Yeah. So
I wonder what the 1%
couple
is.
paragraphs later, he starts like contrasting the Old and the New Testament, and there's this spot he says, the spirit of the New Testament is undoubtedly asceticism. However, your Protestants and rationalists may twist it to suit their purpose. Asceticism is the denial of the will to live. And the transition from the Old Testament to the New, from the dominion of law to that faith, to that of faith, from justification by works to redemption through the mediator. And I don't know, like, that didn't feel right to me. I mean, in particular, just that, like, and maybe I'm misunderstanding him here, but when I think about the transition from the Old Testament to the New, I'm thinking about, I'm reading that as him sort of drawing a delineation between, you know, like Jewish faith and Christian faith. Mm-hmm. And within Christian faith, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different spins on it, right? And when he's talking about, like, the dominion of law to that of faith, like, that almost feels like a distinction between Catholicism and Protestantism right there. And you know, redemption through the mediator, I mean, that was the whole revolution in the Protestant Revolution, is that you didn't need the mediator, right? The priests were the mediators before. And so I just, you know, I feel like there's a lot of nuance to Christianity that he's kind of painting over here. Mm-hmm. And in particular, I don't know, like, it's really interesting. I haven't thought enough about this yet, but that asceticism is the denial of the will to live. I don't know that I disagree with that. So that being said, like, within Christianity, while it is about the afterlife, right, and that's where your redemption comes, like, you don't get there without what you do in this life, right? And so it's not that it's the denial of the will to live, because you do have to sort of live and go through, like, you have to take that journey to get your, you know, quote, just reward, right, in the afterlife.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought this up, because you basically found the kernel of what I would say Nietzsche took from what, I mean, whether or not he did that, like, and say, like, read Schopenhauer and was like, I'm going to run with this. But that's essentially a major thesis in Nietzsche's work that we just basically finished reading about, of this idea, you know, because wouldn't you agree, Antushka, that Nietzsche takes this idea of the will, first off, to live, and he really elaborates on it, and I guess renames it into a will to power, I suppose, and but life affirming versus life denying, right? And yeah, I mean, he definitely talks about Christianity as life denying and as an ascetic religion. And
you're talking about Schopenhauer?
I'm talking about Nietzsche.
Okay, Nietzsche viewed it that way.
Yes, okay. And I mean, it's you can kind of see where he might have gotten that in Schopenhauer. And his genealogy of morals is all about how it's like you had an ancient morality, which was good versus bad, and then it became good versus evil in Christianity as these, I guess he would say, the priests took over. It was a priestly phenotype, which was an ascetic phenotype, which was one that, you know, teaches denial of I guess you could say the will. And, you know, you're telling your body not to do things. You're constantly telling it that it's sinful and that its urges are sinful and bad. And so that's how it becomes a denial of life and whatnot. Because anything that the body wants to do is kind of natural in Nietzsche's head.
And after having learned some weird tidbits about Nietzsche's life, he did want to do some pretty weird things. So.
Yes.
So maybe people were telling him stuff was sinful because it was pretty out there.
Yeah. No, I keep trying to tell people to read Nietzsche like a Reddit troll. Like, he was like one of the first Reddit trolls, and maybe even incels or like hipsters. We've got a lot of words. Not that hipsters and incels and Reddit trolls are all the same thing, but he is some interesting amalgamation of all those things.
I heard you're supposed to read him like Alex Jones.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Alex Jones is married.
I heard that from you guys.
Really? Well, I heard that from Mr. X.
I said that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, on the last podcast.
I could see
like
that.
He's a ranting, raving conspiracy.
Yeah, I could kind of see that. Yeah.
Brother X, was that from the section on affirmation and denial of the will to live? I don't think I read that section. The New Testament thing.
Yeah, so it's in the, you know, I don't know how weird my translation is. It's in the middle of a longer paragraph. For me, it's on the 8th of 9 pages. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. Though it is on affirmation and denial of the will to live.
Is that a heading? I don't think I had headings.
Oh, yeah. Wait, how much of it did you read? How many pages?
I read 10 pages.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. My copy is super different.
Yeah, mine it probably is too. So I think I think we'll come back to that, but I think for the sake of time, let's jump to the second one and just cover a few things. So I mean, in this, he's talking about more about existence and how I would say he thinks about consciousness. That's one of the reasons I wanted to read it. And it gets in. He defines.
That's a good
what
reaction. Brother X's reaction. We don't have video on this podcast, but it was pretty funny.
Oh, damn. Okay, I missed it.
Well, Mr. X is highly predictable.
Yes, definitely. So first off, he sort of splits your being. He's talking about what happens after death. Right. He's addressing this idea, and he's like, if you want to, answer this most correctly to somebody that just needs an answer, you just say after your death you will be what you were before your birth, right? And that'll shut them up. But then he goes into it more, and he's saying, well, okay, so your consciousness is going to get destroyed, right? I mean, because your consciousness is dependent upon your body, and it's also dependent upon the intellect and whatnot. But there's a kernel of your consciousness that will not die, and it's this kernel that will sort of, after your body breaks down, it will then rebuild into somebody new, and that will be that's the immortality of that he believes in. And this kernel is will. That's what he thinks is the indestructible thing that will of you that will sort of move on. But the consciousness, or as he says, kind of like the phenomenology of consciousness, the phenomenon of it will be destroyed, and you won't have that anymore. So you'll have no memory about any of this stuff. So, but he thinks about consciousness in a similar way that I do, which makes sense because, he's read, Western philosophy. I feel like if you read Western philosophy, you're going to think about consciousness in a certain way of at least the present. And it seems like he doesn't call it the not present, but, you've got a not present aspect. But he does something interesting where he splits the present in two halves, which I certainly don't do, into an objective and a subjective half. And so he calls the objective half alone has the intuition of time as its form and thus streams irresistibly away. The subjective half stands firm and thus is always the same. It is from this that there originates our lively recollection of what is long past, and, despite our knowledge of the fleetingness of our existence, the consciousness of our immortality. Because he's saying how, like, you kind of feel like you're going to live forever. There's something that tells you that. But yeah, I mean, he who, by the virtue of the strength of his memory and imagination, can most clearly call up what is long past in his own life will be more conscious than others of the identity of all present moments throughout the whole of time. So he's saying basically that the present arises from us, and he who in such intuitive fashion becomes aware that the present, which is in the strictest sense the sole form of reality, has its source in us, and thus arises from within and not from without, cannot doubt the indestructibility of his own being. He will understand rather that although when he dies the objective world, with the medium through which it presents itself, the intellect, will be lost to him, his existence will not be affected by it, for there has been as much reality within him as without. So, I don't know. I mean, this was a weird, kind of optimistic aspect of his philosophy, but I also wanted to know, I guess, what Antushka thought about it. And I don't know, Brother X, did you read this part, or I don't know?
Mm-mm.
Okay, it's okay. I didn't know if maybe you accidentally read it without realizing it.
I think that the dialogue he does at the end
Oh yeah, with
an 8,
Thrasymachus.
is a pretty good summation, and I think would allow us to talk about it a little bit. I think I don't know. It could be worth reading it.
It's kind of long.
Yeah.
I mean, if you guys want to read it, I'm fine with that.
So I would sum this entire section up with the idea that he proposes a few times from different angles, is that after you die, you will be as you were before you were born.
Yes.
And that is the state of the being, both non-being and complete being. Like, you will be everything and nothing all at once, because you will be nothing in that your consciousness will be no more. So your awareness, your personhood, your individuality will be gone. However, you will live on dispersed into the beings of everything else.
Right.
And you know this because you are the product of the beings of everything that has come before you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think in 7, he sort of says that very succinctly. That which dies is destroyed, but a germ remains over out of which there proceeds a new being, which then enters into existence without knowing whence it has come nor why it is as it is. This is the mystery of palingenesis.
Right.
It reveals to us that all those beings living at the present moment contain within them the actual germ of all which live in the future, and that these, therefore, in a certain sense, exist already, which he contrasts with metempsychosis, which is the transference of the entire so-called soul into another body, versus palingenesis, which is decomposition and reconstruction of the individual, in which will alone persists and, assuming the shape of a new being, receives a new intellect.
Yeah.
So what do you think of that?
I think it's like the other one. He's just saying stuff.
Well, you know, it is, but it's also, it kind of got me thinking that he's sort of getting at the hard problem of consciousness, it feels like. The phenomenology versus, like, you know, this, there's being, and then there's all the sort of extra aspect that of being. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like when he talks about will, he's almost talking about the hard problem of consciousness.
Right.
But I
think that the statement that what happens after you die is the same as before you were born feels like an assertion that can't really be backed up.
No.
I mean, but it could be true. I'm not even saying it's wrong. It just he argues at the beginning that a mature, well-reasoned person will know that. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's an absurd starting point.
Well, are you a mature, well-reasoned person?
I don't know. I have no idea. I'm saying, from my perspective, that sounds crazy. The assertion doesn't sound crazy. It could be true. It doesn't sound that wild. But to me, it's not even close to the only option.
Well, so what did you think about this idea, though, that like he's describing an intrinsic definition of cognition as, once you have cognition, you have this split into objective versus subjective, or he puts it elsewhere as knower versus known.
Right.
Do you at least agree with that?
I mean, to me, it's like an XY axis. He's putting it on a graph, and objective is time. So that's what moves us across over time, and then subjective are the data points across time, or within time.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's a way of laying it out.
Well, the reason I'm pushing on this, though, is because this is something we come back to a lot when we talk about everything, I suppose. is that, you know, we always come back to subjectivity versus objectivity, right? And I think we've talked about this before, but it does seem like subjectivity and objectivity are joined at the hip.
Right.
That whenever you have one, you have the other.
Well, because you can't know whether there is an object without a subject to observe.
Right. Exactly.
tree in the woods.
Yes, and that they are also an outgrowth of consciousness. Because
that even objectivity is an outgrowth of consciousness.
Yes.
Because its existence requires a subject.
Which is why I like that part where he talks about where the transcendent part is that is in the Thrasymachus part, isn't it?
Yeah. I think there's a part of it we should read, because there's a part of it I want to talk about.
Okay, do you want to...
Well, finish your point and then we'll...
Well, so it's... I mean... Yeah. So transcendent knowledge, this is what Philoctetes says or whatever, is that which passing beyond all possible experience strives to determine the nature of things as they are in themselves. Immanent knowledge, on the other hand, is that which confines itself within the bounds of possible experience and can therefore speak only of phenomena. You, as an individual, will come to an end with your death, but your individuality is not your essential and ultimate being, only a manifestation of it. Your individuality is not the thing in itself, but only the phenomenal form. But that's, again, transcendent knowledge in here sounds like it is the objective knowledge, essentially. Passing beyond all possible experience. Oh, no, but that's the whole point. Yeah, this is why
transcendent knowledge, I have a note as is rationalistic, and immanent knowledge is empirical. Because transcendent knowledge strives to determine the nature of things as they are in themselves. Immanent knowledge, on the other hand, is that which confines itself within the bounds of possible experience.
Right. So transcendent knowledge is knowledge beyond consciousness.
Is transcendent knowledge.
I guess what I'm saying, well, yes, I think from a Kantian perspective it is.
Right.
But this is what I'm saying is in his standpoint, it almost sounds like he's talking about something not objective or subjective, but beyond those. And I'm trying to find the part where he talks about
transcending those.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Should we play some music while you're looking?
Yeah. I don't know.
All right. So maybe we can bring Brother X into this one. But so a little bit further down, there's an exchange between these two where Thrasymachus is trying to, Philolethus is trying to convince Thrasymachus of his immortality. Like, not to worry, my friend. Even if you die, you will be eternal, because your will moves on, your body essentially decomposes and goes into other things. Your will move into the will of something in the future. And so Thrasymachus says, well, I would not give 2 pence for your immortality if it doesn't include the continued existence of my individuality, which is a fun response. And then Philolethus says, but perhaps you would be willing to bargain a little. Suppose I guarantee you the continued existence of your individuality, but on the condition it is preceded by a completely unconscious death sleep of 3 months. So where are we so far? Are you in? A coma, induced a coma, whoever.
Induce a coma.
A 3-month coma. And then you're immortal. You're an individual. You live forever.
What does that mean? So I guess what I'm not totally clear on yet is when you're talking about living forever.
Right.
Are we talking about living as we are living right now?
Well, that's what Thrasymachus wants. And so Philolethus is saying, yes, I'll give you the you as you live forever, but first you have to do a 3-month coma.
And you just want to know if we would do that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm just curious where you are on it.
I mean, I know how it ends, so I don't know.
Of course.
Yeah.
I'll say no.
All right. So Thrasymachus says, I would agree to that, which is weird to me. But Philolethus says, but since we're completely unconscious, we have no notion of the passage of time. It is all one to us, whether while we are lying in that death sleep, 3 months or 10,000 years pass in the conscious world. For in either case, when we awake, we have to take on trust how long we've been sleeping, so that it will be all the same to you whether your individuality is restored to you after 3 months or 10,000 years. This is terrible. I already have a huge problem with it, but And then Thrasymachus says that cannot very well be denied. I guess he's agreeing with this point. He's been got. Philolethus has tricked him
in true Plato.
Exactly.
Method, right. Yeah.
And then here's the kind of kicker of it. But this is Philolethus again. But now, so after Thrasymachus agrees, it doesn't matter if it's 3 months or 10,000 years. Philolethus says, but now, if after these 10,000 years have passed, it was forgotten to wake you up, this would not, I think, be a very great misfortune, since your period of non-being would have been so long compared with your brief period of being that you would have got quite used to it. What is certain, however, is that you would not have the least idea you had failed to be woken up, and you would be completely content with the whole thing if you knew that the mysterious mechanism which moves your present phenomenal form had not ceased for one moment throughout those 10,000 years to produce and move other phenomena of the same sort. And then Thrasymachus is, you bastard, you cheated me out of my individuality. Right. And then the great part is this whole exchange ends in the best way. Eventually, Thrasymachus says, this whole conversation is childish, and I don't want to waste my time with this. I'm going to do, screw you guys, I'm going home.
Exactly, yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yes, good. I also agree with that. I think Thrasymachus is right. But he got himself trapped in this silly thing because it would matter if it was 3 months or 10,000 years because your entire, everything that matters to you about life would be gone. So it's a bad trick, and Thrasymachus is a dummy.
No, it's a very bad trick. And while I, in general, agree that in an unconscious state, you won't be able to measure the difference between 3 months and 10,000 years, you would be able to intuit it upon waking up. Like, maybe you wouldn't be able to intuit the difference between 3 months and 3 months in one day, but, you know.
Because to me, this implies that a surgeon actually, there's no reason for them to ever wake anybody up. It wouldn't be such a bad thing. Just let them die. They don't know.
Well, yeah. So, and it's funny, because this just got me thinking of Futurama, you know, which is, it's basically just what happened in Futurama. Yeah, exactly. I mean, because your experience is everybody you love too, right? And stuff like that.
So what is the medical answer to that? Because
it feels your individuality to me, that.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, it goes to the same point of how, like, when you move somebody, like an older person who maybe they don't have really accelerated dementia when they're living at the house that they've been living at for many years, but then you move them and they start to deteriorate. Part of it is because it shows how important our surroundings are for our mind and brain, and how they, like, our surroundings do anchor and affect our personality. And I mean, I think it's less affected, you know, in I guess you could say the prime of our life. It's like we are more independent of them and able to kind of just maneuver. But ultimately,
sure,
I believe, and this is what the association as philosophers believe, is that, our surroundings are the basis of our mind. So every sensation, including sensations of our loved ones and our surroundings and everything like that, is going to play a role into what makes us us. And so if you take that away, then you will become a different person, which is why it's impossible to have anything that's not transitory. And Heraclitus was really the only Greek philosopher that was right? Anyway.
Shout out to Heraclitus.
Put your foot in the water thing, you know, and it's the different river, blah, blah.
But I think that the key here is that Schopenhauer is arguing for this. Because he says earlier in the chapter, indeed, since mature consideration of the matter leads to the conclusion that total non-being would be preferable to such an existence as ours.
Yeah, no, yeah.
So from his perspective, the surgeon would essentially be doing good by putting you in a coma and then letting you die or killing you.
Well, he gets at that earlier, maybe it's even in the last essay.
In the last one, he does, yeah.
Yeah, talking about how it's like there are, and you have people making this point now about like how it's terrible to want to bring anybody into this world because of all the suffering.
Yep.
Millennials are really just Schopenhauerists.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. Brother X doesn't look at my Instagram story. He's too cool. But Antushka, you look every once in a while, and I don't
read it. I just really.
Well, that's okay. No, I mean that's fine.
I'm kidding.
He appreciates your likes.
No, but this was many months ago too. It was from r/childless, which is a subreddit about people who don't want to have kids, and in fact are sort of, I would say, openly antagonistic to people who want to have kids. And it was exactly that. It was like a person saying how all the quote birthers should be killed essentially for the crime of bringing people into this world where there's suffering.
Right.
So where does Schopenhauer stand on childless cat ladies?
Oh, I'm sure he doesn't like them because he was being, he had to pay one for many years.
Right.
I don't know if she was childless.
He should kind of like them in theory.
He should in theory.
They're doing an act of good.
Right.
Yes, it's true. Well, and as you were reading that, I found the transcendent part, but I won't bring us back until we finish this. But yes, I want to remember to bring that up. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you asked about how science looks at it, and yes, I think science. I don't know how science as a whole looks at it, but that's how I look at it. Our personality is a multitude of things that are constantly shifting and changing, which is why we're constantly shifting and changing.
Right. No, I mean, why bring them out of the anesthesia?
Yeah, I don't understand your question or your point, I guess. Why? Because you're saying you've essentially
from a Schopenhauer perspective, there's no reason to bring them out of anesthesia.
So I don't know if he was saying that, though. He was...
Well, he's not saying anesthesia, but...
Well, I mean, we should probably read his thing on suicide then.
He's saying that's a preferable state of being.
He's saying but he's also, I don't think pro-suicide is the point. So
I'm not saying suicide. I'm saying you put somebody under anesthesia.
Or murder.
Well, he says... Well, Philolethus says, and he's definitely putting himself on that side, that it would not be a great misfortune to not even wake you up at all.
So you were, I guess part of the distinction is like when you put somebody under anesthesia, it wears off at some point. When you're talking about like, if you want to relate it to a medically induced coma, can we bring somebody out of a coma?
I mean, it just depends on the coma.
Right. But I mean, like, if somebody goes into a coma, like, sometimes they're just in it till they're not, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So we don't actually currently medically have the option to do good by Schopenhauer or not, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, I guess if you're getting at the point that there are comas that we have no control over. That's certainly
right. So I guess
case.
I don't know. Two things here, Antushka. Mm-hmm. One, I guess I'm not sure if the analogy we're making is precise or not to what Schopenhauer is talking about, but generally his assertion is maybe that non-being is preferable to being, though he maybe wouldn't be in favor of. Like
killing people.
Right.
That's how I interpret it.
Right.
But I guess to answer the question, though, that I think you were asking is if a doctor could put somebody into a coma and then have the option of bringing them out of it, put them into a state of unconsciousness.
Right. It's not anesthesia
and
that
have
wears
the
off.
option to bring them out of it.
From Schopenhauer's perspective, there is no...
Right, from Schopenhauer, but the question of should they bring the person out or not, I mean, that depends on your perspective, right? And most people, I don't think most people would agree with Schopenhauer's view that non-being is preferable to being.
Right. Well, I think he knows that too. I think that's the answer, is why they would bring the person out, is that most people aren't Schopenhauer.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think
Right.
I think that Antushka, you're doing the thing that I like this about you, but also sometimes I feel like it's a disservice. Is you're so you were saying too precise. Or not precise, Brother X, but I think it's too precise. It's like it's too precise or...
Well, I guess when I said imprecise, I mean it's so narrow that it's kind of missing the point almost.
Yeah, it's so exact. You're taking it exactly as his word or whatever.
Well, the reason I'm thinking of it...
Literally.
Yeah, that's the word. Because that's the example he's giving is a death sleep, which
I know
essentially is like anesthesia, right? Like while you're under the knife. It's very close to that. What he's imagining is that you are essentially dead. You are unconscious for some amount of time.
Yes. But my interpretation is, regardless of whether he thinks that's preferable, or at least thinks it's the natural state, it doesn't seem like he is... I'm going to hold my opinion because
it's an unresolved question that he doesn't answer in that reading.
But he has a whole essay called Suicide. So he talks about. I'm sure he talks about it there, and I'm sure he talks about.
But I don't think this counts as suicide. The reason this example is important is because it doesn't count. But I don't know. This is where I'm wondering. I don't know that he would call that murder either. Because you are not conscious. Like, can you murder a dead body? Can you murder a rock?
Well, and this is where I would be like, I don't know how good and helpful of an example it is then, because it's like, okay, so you had me at the death sleep is kind of like a surgeon's anesthesia, but if we're saying that the person is now considered dead if they're under anesthesia, that's not the case.
Well, no, I'm not saying they're considered dead.
No, but you're saying you don't know if he would consider it murder, but you're saying that if we take that analogy to mean the person under anesthesia, which is what you were saying, then...
Yeah, I can explain. Okay. I can explain what I mean. What I mean is that the person under anesthesia is not conscious from a Schopenhauerian definition of conscious, and I think most people, if we're talking the level of anesthesia before death, like the fourth level, whatever it is, that person is not. Most people would say they are not conscious. They are unconscious for the surgery. Now, I don't think most people would say they are dead.
I think most people would say that they are not dead.
That they're alive but not conscious, right?
Yes.
Because you can tell that their heart still beats, they still breathe.
Right. But what I'm wondering is, would Schopenhauer consider that murder? Because the consciousness has been stripped. Like,
I don't know.
Can you murder a dandelion? Is that murder from Schopenhauer's perspective?
You can kill a plant.
No, not kill, murder. Murder or suicide. These are special words.
Yes, no, I understand what you're saying. But the fact is, you've removed it momentarily, but you haven't the being still has the propensity to be conscious, which separates it from the dandelion.
Right, the dandelion can't be conscious again.
Yes.
Right, but that's why this example is interesting, because he's saying it's 3 months or 10,000 years, doesn't matter. And in fact... 10,000 years or never, none of it matters.
You love dandelions.
So I don't know about Schopenhauer, but I think for most people the answer is yes, they would still consider it murder.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I'll give you a ridiculous analogy. Mr. X, when he was home a couple of weeks ago, was watching the Trailer Park Boys. And there was an episode where they didn't want to steal people's furniture, so they had one person move the furniture to the street, and then the other person take the furniture, right? And so the thing is, like, if you still induce that lack of consciousness, and then you take away the rest, I think most people are going to look at that and say that's not right.
Yeah,
that's
I
immoral.
agree about
That's
most
wrong.
people. I'm saying that what I'm getting, the implication from Schopenhauer's dialogue that he's including here, is that it would not be murder to kill somebody in a coma.
I guess I don't know why that matters if Schopenhauer would think that or not. And I don't think he's actually saying that either.
Yeah, I don't get the impression he's saying it, but we haven't read enough.
It's not the point he's making from that story.
I think there's a couple issues with the... First off, I agree, he's brought up chloroform previously, but he doesn't explicitly bring it up in this example. So first off, we don't even know that he... Not in, at least in my translation.
He said it somewhere, I don't remember where,
but
in the
it's not
chapter.
in this part.
It's not in the dialogue, right?
Yes, it's not in the dialogue, which is, you're saying that it's similar to anesthesia, but I'm telling you that we don't, it could be a completely contrived
Right, like he might mean something else by death sleep.
Yes, exactly.
I think he means something like a coma.
Yes, I get that that's what you think.
What do you think he means?
I think that I didn't pay that much thought to this section, to be perfectly honest, because I was just like, I get what he's saying.
Because it's absurd.
It's absurd. and it honestly felt like Hofstadter's, tortoise. And, like, I just hate analogies and some, not really, but I like analogies, but I didn't think about it that deep because I felt like I got what he was saying before, which was that there's an indestructible aspect to us that's called will, and that this lives on, and that...
And that's the thing with analogies, is when you start taking parts of them literally,
right,
they aren't worth anything anymore because they're about making a general point usually and trying to help people understand it from a different perspective. And so if you got that point, then the rest of it is completely meaningless. He's not trying to make another point from it.
Yeah. I agree, though, that maybe he is. I mean, this is the problem with philosophy is, for all we know, Anthony Antushka's is correct, and that it's a very deep point, and that he does indeed think murdering. Basically, what you're saying is you think if the being's unconscious, it's not murder, is the point.
Right.
Yes. Maybe. I certainly agree that consciousness, we look at the law has an explicit bias against conscious things.
Right.
In that, like, manslaughter versus, first degree and all that. Manslaughter is basically unconscious murder, right? Which is a lesser degree than first to second and third. And it's like the degree of murder increases as the premeditation and, if you will, the consciousness of the act increases. So certainly our society treats conscious stuff with more, issue. So like maybe he's saying that in the limit, which I guess this is a limit. The analogy is a example in the limit, right? Mm-hmm. But I think all he's really trying to get at, which is what we've kind of already summarized, is that you are more than just, I guess, your inner life. You are your entire experience. Your surroundings, the people that you interact with, and stuff. I guess that's the big point
you are immortal whether you want to be or not, but your individuality is not, and it is an absurdity to think that it could or should be.
Right. Your will's immortal, your individuality isn't. Yeah.
Very eloquently stated, Antushka.
Yeah,
once
Antushka.
again.
What the hell, dude?
Once again.
You put me to shame.
I hope it'd be funny if I was totally wrong about all the things.
We can only
That's
hope.
a great summary for some other book, you idiot.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well.
Nice.
I'll just quickly finish. The point I was making about the transcendent, he's saying our hang on. I was only... what the hell?
What's happening here? You're like catching yourself by surprise.
Yeah. Our intrinsic actual being is, so far as we are able to penetrate it, nothing but will. And this is in itself without cognition. If then death deprives us of intellect, we are thereby only transported to our cognitionless primal state, which is not, however, simply an unconscious state. It's not simply an unconscious state, but rather one elevated above that form, a state in which the antithesis of subject and object falls away, because that which is to be known would here be actually and undividedly one with that which knows, and the basic condition of all cognition, which is precisely this antithesis, would be lacking. So basically, he's saying what I was trying to say earlier, that it's like the state of death isn't unconsciousness. It's something beyond that, outside of the definition of objective and subjective. It's the antithesis of it, which is what I felt like he was saying is what transcendent knowledge is.
Right.
It's like you can't even describe it in the subject-object state, because that's within...
What is the antithesis of subject-object? What is anti-subject, anti-object?
This is another reason why there's an interesting link between, like, Schopenhauer and Judith Butler, believe it or not.
No, I felt that too, actually.
Yes, I think it's what Judith Butler is talking about, is like, it's the pre-cultural sort of condition that we can't ever actually describe outside of culture, outside of
So what
language.
are we talking about?
Something.
Well, no,
Or
not
nothing.
something, because that's a term
That's
in
a
language, right? Not something, but not nothing either. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. It's dumb.
Yeah. But I actually like that a lot, because it's first off this interesting overlap between what you would think diametrically opposed people would be, and
I don't think so. They both are arguing for oblivion, so they're both doing the same work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I really don't like philosophers, is what I'm learning.
Well, it's another funny thing, because we all picked up on the fact that Schopenhauer is probably just depressed and is like projecting essentially.
Right.
This was another thing that Nietzsche did a really good job of discussing, and when he talks about philosophizing with a hammer, he basically says how, like, anytime you're reading a philosopher, you're just reading them,
Right.
like. You can't get out of that. So if it's their philosophy, it's just who they are, essentially. So, to that point, he's just probably a sad old man, Anyway.
Right.
Nice.
So I want to put forth something.
Uh-oh.
Because we were talking about examples and, like the dialogue. The dialogue feels almost like an artistic example added in or something like that. Like he did a little interpretive dance to explain himself.
Yeah, or they all grew up reading Plato. He just did his own.
So I think it goes back a little bit to the Camus reading, which seemed to be more impactful to me than anybody, than maybe to you and to anybody on Reddit. But we did a reading a couple weeks ago on Camus where he was talking about create dangerously, and he had this interesting distinction where he said that art for art's sake was bad, but also art serving political ideology was bad, and that art should seek truth in the sense of sort of godly truth, like an objective truth that has to do with the truth of human experience or something like that, and how great art taps into that in some way. And so I was thinking about this because I was listening to that Daryl Cooper episode where he talks about Nietzsche versus Dostoevsky, and I was thinking about somebody writing primarily philosophical text or, like nonfiction text where they're putting forward ideas in prose using discourse versus somebody writing novels, which is also using prose, but the way that you put forth ideas in novels is not direct. It is an artistic. It's the use of symbol to explore something beyond itself, and so all of these philosophers arguing that you can't get at these things. It makes me think of that Leonard Bernstein quote where he said that music expresses the unknowable. And I said, like, that didn't really resonate with me until a few weeks ago when we read Camus. And so I'm starting to think the reason I was so interested in that dialogue in this chapter is because we're introducing this other side. We're getting at parts of what he's saying that can't be stated with his own argumentation. He's using some kind of artistic symbolism to invoke his ideas that he can't explicitly state.
He's explaining through experience, I think, right? Artistic experience.
Right.
Or the experience of an art form.
Right. And so my answer to the philosophers who say that it can't be known is maybe it can, but not through discourse.
Well, that's certainly what a musician would want to think.
And I'll just say one more time, stated very eloquently, Antushka.
Yeah. Versus as a scientist,
enough of that. That's good.
As a scientist, I think it's complete horse.
Nice. I like it. Good. That's what I needed.
No. I see what
it sounds like complete horse. I think that's a fair response.
No. I think it gets at a good point, though, and is kind of what Foucault and Nietzsche have been talking about. Is that it's like art has this ability to communicate things that are undescribable, like you were saying, without discourse. So, enliven higher ideals.
Nice.
Okay, well,
enliven something.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So,
all right.
Summary thoughts, Brother X. What do you think overall?
What do I think overall?
You hate it? You love it?
I didn't hate. If it was really long, I would have suffered through it because it's just. It's a very different outlook than what I have.
Yes.
I didn't hate it. There were things about it that were interesting. It also just made me feel very sorry for Schopenhauer and what his life must have been to have come to that perspective.
Right. Do you see any value in it? Do you think it's like, what do you see as its importance in the body of philosophical
It didn't
work?
feel important to me. Yeah. Again, there were kind of interesting points, but there was nothing in there that felt like it rocked my world. There's a lot of it that, honestly, if you had told me it was written by a teenager, I would have believed you.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Albeit a well-read teenager, but still, it felt kind of like ranty and angsty, and that's fine. It's on the sufferings of the world, right? It's an essay. He's writing, So I also, I think, didn't go in with sort of expectations beyond that either.
Right.
So,
what about you, Antushka?
I kind of agree. I don't know if it comes off as very important. I also agree with Brother X. Reading it, it's like, wow, this guy was having a rough go of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, I think its easy importance is in the fact that I think it's obviously Nietzsche read Schopenhauer, and it's obvious to see how some important things that Nietzsche elaborated on and influenced a lot of people with. I can see the antecedents in Schopenhauer. So it has that importance in the canon of philosophy for sure.
I think also the flipping of the importance of pain and pleasure
I was just about to
is...
say,
I think whether I agree with his conclusions about it, I think it's an important way of thinking about things. It's important to be able to flip those ideas and to see the drives that, or the drive of avoiding pain and what is downstream of that.
Yeah, completely agree. Because again, also, even pessimistic philosophy, it's like all of these have antecedents in ancient Greek philosophy. It's like you know, like hedonism and all that stuff versus asceticism. And, you know, you had groups of philosophers that were pushing towards all of these. But yeah, I completely agree. It's like it's also just important from the standpoint, like you said, of just having somebody look at things completely different and flipped on top of its head. And then, of course, I just do agree with a lot of what he's thinking, at least in terms of the mind. I will admit I'm not as pessimistic about the whole suffering, although, you know, I have my moments, but I suppose that could be a reflection of my own depression. But how he looks at the mind, I certainly agree and think is useful. I don't know if I agree with his objective-subject split yet. Right. In terms of in the present moment. This is something I've been trying to sort of reconcile with my own thoughts also of how it's like, even though you have a present and a not present, you technically experience them all in the present, which is, I think, kind of what he's getting at, you know? And I think that's how his objective, subjective feels like it could be my present and not present kind of thing. Yeah. Because I'm talking about how time is essentially comes into existence with consciousness, and anytime you're in the not present, right? And then he's talking about time coming into existence with objectivity. Anyway, I'll stop talking. Brother X is bored.
All right. Well, we'll have to do something more exciting next time.
Yeah.
This was good though. I don't know. Like I think it led to like an interesting discussion.
Vigorous.
I wasn't bored reading it, and I wasn't bored talking about it. So
nice.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
till next time.
Yep. See y'all next time.
All right.
Goodbye.
Thanks, guys.